Thank you, of course, for the invitation. Even if you're not familiar with their name, you will be familiar with some of the works that they have produced. The Artangel Trust has been credited with providing artists with all the money and logistics that they need to create one-off dream projects. An independent art commissioning agency based in London, it is neither a private company acting as an intermediary for a client, nor a public sector body like Art on the Underground, for example. It has operated as a charity since 1985 and is responsible for some of the most striking, ephemeral and site-specific artworks of the last 30 years, from Rachel Whiteread's House to Jeremy Deller's The Battle of Orgreave. Artangel's existence spans 3 decades, which now seem to form a coherent whole in terms of both art historical and political periodization. And it was launched as a clear reaction to the cuts in funding for the visual arts introduced by the Thatcher government at the end of the 70s. And it has since adapted in a distinctive way to changing cultural policies. Its mixed economic model, a recourse to public, private, and corporate funds, is the result of the more general hybridization of funding encouraged by successive governments in Britain since the 80s. And it does offer a contemporary case study on broader questions concerning the specificities of British art patronage. So I wish to demonstrate that the singular way that its directors, James Lingwood and Michael Morris, who took over from Roger Tooke in 1991, its directors have responded to the vagaries of public funding and have harnessed new national attitudes to philanthropy, how this has created a sustainable independent model, but also how this has been reflected formally in their approach to site, in the way they envisage the creation and exhibition of art outside of the gallery. The locational art produced by the charity Artangel, the installation art that Claire Bishop has identified as a prominent and predominant contemporary form, has indeed mirrored the social and economic changes that the country has gone through. Artangel projects are very much about experiencing the place as well as the art. These are pictures taken in one of their latest projects, Ben Rivers' exhibition in the former television centre in Hammersmith. Not necessarily the most inviting setting, the most accessible or public place to exhibit. And that notion of publicness is important. Public spaces have been increasingly privatized, mainly through advertising, but also because of the new modes of communication, which mean that we take our private conversations on private transports or to the street. Or still, and this has been quite prevalent in London especially, with the ambivalence of commercialized public spaces, which were formalized in the UK in 2004 with business improvement districts, BIDs. Areas within which local businesses have been encouraged to invest beyond their private premises and whereby taking in charge their environment, in a way by annexing it, they decide to provide additional or improved services. It simply means that the environment is prettified with appropriate street furniture, it is clean, it is secure, it becomes high-end, and the shops are able to make a profit from that environment. Some site-specific art projects have responded to this ambiguous publicness by opening up private, hidden, or more generally unexpected spaces to the public. Disused underground tunnels, old cinemas, storage lockers. Of course, the publicness of art does not necessarily derive from where it's located, but in site specificity, we will see that the public sector, and I mean funding, the public sphere, and here it's more a political way of understanding the concept, and public space, the public realm, overlap. So with no in-house funds, it is not itself a foundation. Artangel today receive about a third of their financial support from public grants through the Arts Council England, since it was devolved in 1994. They receive a similar amount from co-production, charitable trusts, and foundations, as well as through sponsoring. And then the balance from private patronage issued from a tiered membership, a membership scheme based on subscriptions. So hence the name Artangel. If you give £900, you can become part of the Company of Angels. For £600 per year with a 4-year pledge, you're also part of the Company of Angels, but if you give £5,000, then you are a special angel. The context in which it was launched at the end of the 80s, mid-80s, was one in which direct state support was lowered in the wake of the break the Thatcher government initiated with the post-war consensus. The 80s saw a spectacular U-turn in British cultural policies, from then on geared towards the encouragement of private support for the arts, with the introduction in 1984 of the Business Sponsorship Incentive Scheme, BSIS, which meant that by 1992, government expenditure of £4.5 million a year was producing sponsorship of £7.5 million a year. Qintao has explained quite well that, in fact, yes, there were cuts in fundings, but they weren't that spectacular. Quite simply, funding was redirected to an organization like BSIS to encourage philanthropy rather than go directly to arts organizations. Crucial to Artangel is that their finance is not tied to the completion of specific projects. Their modus operandi being that they never give artists a time frame, and they can spend years discussing their plans with them. So it's not a commission with a specific time frame. When in 1992 Beck's, the brewer, signed a 3-year agreement with the trust, resulting in Rachel Whiteread's house, which was only one of the fruits of their collaboration, and when in 1996 they renewed their support for a further 4 years with an unconditional lump sum of £125,000, Artangel were able at last to count on the secure means usually available to more traditional trusts and foundations. Especially so since at the same time the Arts Council also became more supportive financially. So it wasn't a shift from public support to private support. Artangel were among the first recipients of a national lottery Arts for Everyone award, A4E, a scheme designed to develop new audiences in the arts. Arts aimed at the poor, making sure that working class people came to see the exhibitions. That's what new audiences usually means. The national lottery had been introduced in 1994 by John Major. Margaret Thatcher had been against it for religious reasons mainly. But it was New Labour who was going to benefit from the lottery and from lottery money. Very early on, Artangel understood the benefits that could accrue from accepting that both private and public funders find reassurance in the fact that the project that they're supporting has also passed muster with the other sector. Then in the 1990s and in the noughties, these decades saw the trust resist the promotion of culture as a tourist attraction by New Labour, the systematization of the use of site-specific art for regenerative purposes. The 2010s were then marked by the cuts introduced by the coalition government and its call to self-reliance under the motto, Big Society, in the face of which Artangel were able to demonstrate that their hybrid model of financing, in which Arts Council money was now secured, could allow them to weather such impositions. All this time, Artangel were also responding to the different format art started adopting, its professionalism, its scale, its technological advancement mean that today artworks are conducted like projects, needing planning, infrastructure, technical skill, and money. And so this means that research-based work requires long pre-production time, not simply post-production. And also that a recent taste for the monumental means that money needs to be injected in advance, not simply be the price paid down the road once the work enters the market. Artangel, in this context, have paradoxically both resisted and embraced this now consensual hybridization of funding for art. They have sought to control the degrees of accountability, of private and public instrumentalization, and commercial exploitation, their public, philanthropic, and corporate supports might have been perceived as trying to exert. This reactive position to pressure, though not at all a vocal one on the part of Artangel, can, I believe, sometimes be identified in the types of works that Artangel have commissioned at specific periods, but mostly and much more clearly in the different sites that the agency has chosen to occupy. They were very present in central London and very visible in the 80s and early 90s through the use of the spectacular colour screen on Piccadilly Circus. Here again with this monument. The use of hoardings as well in the streets of London and other major cities in Britain. For example, here with this work by Barbara Kruger, We Don't Need Another Hero, 1987. Today, Artangel seem to seek out less visible, less central locations. Their more subtle approach is a probable reaction to the age of political instrumentalization, which Tony Blair's speech at Tate Modern in 2007 has come to exemplify. This was when Blair insisted that dynamism in the arts and culture creates dynamism in a nation. And he stated that over the previous decade, his government had provided the conditions for a golden age for the arts. The instrumentalization of art under New Labour was economic, this idea that you could make money, especially through tourism, from art. It was also social. There was this seminal book called use of ornament, with this idea that with cultural-led regeneration, which was in fact something that Margaret Thatcher had already supported, but with private funds rather than public funds under New Labour, you could change society, have artists work as in the social field, but also political, with the rebranding of the UK as Cool Britannia at the time, this idea that art could bring prestige to the country, a form of soft power on the international scene. And this was quite true in the 90s, the idea that the focus was now on London rather than New York was something that was remarked at the time. The artists Artangel have supported over the years have been part of one or two generations who have experienced the progressive, though relative, redundancy of the studio space as a place where the work is created before it is exhibited elsewhere. In London, the relationship between art and site changed at the end of the 80s for economic and political reasons. When Margaret Thatcher closed the Greater London Council in 1986, she aimed at reducing subsidies, and this is something that affected artists very much. But it also had a clear geographical effect on the art scene. To the east of London, the Thatcher-backed development of the Docklands and a specifically formulated body that she set up to secure and promote it, the London Dockland Corporation, in fact, created new possibilities for artists. And that's where Damien Hirst curated Frieze in 1988. And then soon galleries followed these artists and moved from west to east with a clear impact on the cityscape. Artangel promote works which reflect this new sense of place. Works you have to go and find, creating what Claire Bishop has called a community of art pilgrims. And you have to discover the art. Invited to enter new territories with one particular feature which seems to stand out. Sorry, that was my picture of the opening of the first Frieze exhibition. One specific feature, and that feature is houses, the house, the home. An exploration of Artangel's archives shows that a lot of energy has been deployed over the years looking for empty houses, negotiating access to buildings. And many of their projects feature houses. The house seems to elicit a strong fascination for British artists who use it as a curatorial site. Yet at the same time, they allow artists to return inside, to work with site specificity, not outdoors, but indoors, in spaces which seem to be the last to escape the surveillance of CCTVs, Google Maps, military intelligence. So I'm just going to go through a few examples. Mike Kelly's mobile homestead here, Saskia Oldevolber's Yes, These Eyes Are the Windows, which explored this house where Van Gogh had stayed for just a few weeks in London in his youth. Catherine Yass with High Wire between two Glasgow tenement blocks on Red Road. They have now been destroyed. Or still Gregor Schneider's Die Familie Schneider in Whitechapel. In fact, you had to visit two different homes, and each time you would witness exactly the same layout and the same people. He'd hired sets of twins to play the same roles in both houses. Roger Hyan's famous Seizure, which has now been relocated at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. The most famous is, of course, Rachel Whiteread's house, which came from here. Qingdao has criticized the commercial use that Beck's has made of its association with Artangel in supporting House. House was original, it was radical in its approach to sculptural space and in the way it explored our notions of domestic space. Its sister product, Beck's Beer, with that picture of a house, is what Frederick Jameson referred to as pastiche, a blank parody that has lost its sense of humor, casting ridicule on the original House. So I was quoting from Qingdao here. House embodies the contradictions Wu pinpoints and does so by inverting its public side, an artwork, and its private side, its domesticity. While the binary reading of the two categories of private and public pitted against each other has prevailed, public is equated with democracy, accessibility, equality, private with the domestic, ownership, elitism, with the private being a lack of publicness, the public a lack of privacy. Artists seem to have found in houses spaces which might embody the possibility of thinking beyond this opposition. The way they redefine the conditions of being inside or outside is an expression of the hybrid conditions of the work's production.
Thank you.